My father didn't know I was standing in the kitchen doorway when he said it. I was 17 and I had gone inside to grab a bag of ice from the chest freezer in the corner. He was leaning against the counter with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, talking to his brother Ray in that low voice he used when the conversation was supposed to stay private. Cole's got 2 job offers lined up and he hasn't even graduated yet, he said. Full scholarship, dean's list, the whole picture. I tell you, Ray, some days I honestly don't know how the same 2 people made both of them. I stopped at the edge of the freezer. Marcus? He made a sound somewhere between a laugh and an exhale. Going nowhere. Smart enough to get by, not driven enough to do anything with it. You know what his plan is after graduation? Nothing concrete. He's got his grandfather's work ethic, and I mean that as the insult it sounds like. Ray said something I couldn't hear. Some kids just don't have it. Dad shifted his weight, looked at the window above the sink. Cole got the drive. Marcus got the coast. I've made my peace with it. You do what you can. He laughed at whatever Ray said back. I set the ice bag on the counter without opening it. I went out the side door instead of the back and walked the long way around the house to the cooler on the porch. That was a Saturday in July. The burgers were overdone the way they always were at my dad's cookouts. My aunt brought her off-brand potato salad. Cole gave a toast about the internship he was starting in August. Dad watched him the whole time with the specific smile he wore when he didn't know his face was doing it. I sat 3 seats down and ate my burger and turned the words over. It was not anger exactly. Anger has heat to it. What I felt was closer to the moment a door stops mid-swing and catches on the latch. No slam, no noise. Just the quiet click of something sealing shut. I helped fold chairs when the sky went orange. Told my mom the food was good. Said goodbye to the cousins. Nobody noticed anything had changed. I had counted on that. Dennis Walker spent 22 years as a civil engineer for the county. He retired with a pension and a plaque and told the story of both at least once per family gathering. He measured people the way he measured projects, deliverables, timelines, legible output. A degree from a good school was a deliverable. A management title before 30 was a timeline. Cole had both. Cole was 3 years older than me and had been the reference point for as long as I could remember. Not because my parents used his name like a weapon. They never did that openly. But because he came up in conversation in a particular way. When I brought home a B in physics, my dad would mention that Cole had tutored himself through AP chemistry with library books. When I quit baseball after 2 seasons because I was bad at it, my dad framed it as a question about follow-through, and then mentioned Cole's 4 years of varsity soccer as the natural conclusion of the sentence. He didn't do it cruelly. That's the part I've sat with longest. Dennis genuinely thought he was motivating me. He thought he was holding up a model and saying, see, it's possible. What he was actually doing was drawing a line and putting me on the wrong side of it every single time. Cole, for his part, was not a bad person. He was driven in the way some people are driven when they figure out early what the rules are and decide to follow them perfectly. He earned his grades, kept his commitments, dressed appropriately for every occasion. He was good at the life our father understood. I was not bad at that life. I just wasn't performing it for an audience. At 17, I didn't have language for any of this. I just knew that when I walked back around the house to the cooler that July Saturday, something in the way I thought about my father had shifted permanently. The model I'd had of him, imperfect but basically fair, had been replaced by something more accurate. He had a favorite. He had spent years politely pretending otherwise, and he told the truth on the phone when he thought no one was there to hear it. I filed that away and went back to the table. I spent about 2 weeks deciding how to handle it. One option was confrontation. Walk into the kitchen some morning, tell him what I'd heard, watch what happened next. I mapped it out more than once. What he would say, probably that he was venting, that Ray had a way of drawing complaints out of him, that it wasn't what it sounded like. What I would say back, how it would end, which was probably with both of us defensive and nothing changed, except the air in the room. I ruled that out on a Thursday night while lying on my bed looking at the ceiling. The second option was to prove him wrong. Work hard enough, visibly enough, that he had to revise his assessment out loud. I had thought about this version longer than the first, but it had a problem buried in it. It still made him the judge. I would still be performing for an evaluation I hadn't agreed to enter. Even if I succeeded, the victory would belong to him. It would only exist because he'd finally granted it. I ruled that out too. The third option was simpler. I would stop needing his evaluation at all. Not dramatically. I wasn't going to write a letter, refuse Thanksgiving, or make a scene at the next cookout. I was going to become exactly what he apparently expected. A son who moved through the house without requiring much attention. Polite, present, empty of anything he could use or approve of. He had told Ray that I was going nowhere. Fine. I would go there quietly, on my own schedule without giving him a front row seat. The decision didn't feel like freedom at 17. It felt more like a lock turning in a door, not the slamming kind. The other kind, where you turn the key all the way and test the handle once to make sure it's set. It was set. I went to school on Monday and answered a question in history class and ate lunch with the same two people I always ate lunch with and came home and did my homework at the kitchen table while dinner cooked. My father came home from work at 6 and set his keys on the counter and asked how my day was. I said fine. He poured himself a glass of water and went to watch the news. That was that. The word I used most that fall was fine. How was school going? Fine. What did I want for my birthday? Nothing specific. Did I want to come to Cole's welcome home dinner when he came back for fall break? Sure. Dennis noticed the change in temperature and interpreted it the way parents interpret most things when a teenage boy goes quiet. Attitude. He mentioned it to my mother once in a conversation I caught through the wall. She said I was 17 and to give me space. He seemed to accept that and moved on. That was the thing about my father's model of me. It was already low enough that a drop in warmth didn't register as structural damage. He had categorized me as unmotivated. A quiet, unmotivated son looked more or less the same as an engaged one from where he was standing. He wasn't watching closely enough to see the difference. My mother watched more closely but read it differently. She would check in with a hand on my shoulder in the kitchen, ask if something was going on at school, ask if I had a problem with a friend. I told her things were fine and meant it sincerely from my own perspective, which only confused her. Nothing was going on. I had just rearranged my internal geography and hadn't mentioned the renovation to anyone. Cole came home for fall break with a new girlfriend, a laptop bag from his internship company, and stories about the work. My dad leaned forward at dinner the whole time, elbows on the table, asking follow-up questions. I ate and said the pasta was good when my mom asked. Cole turned to me once and asked what I was thinking about doing after graduation. Something in the trades, maybe, I said. He nodded in the way people nod when they don't know what to do with an answer. I cleared the plates and went upstairs. Dennis didn't ask me the same question that night, which was, in its own way, the most honest thing that happened at dinner. I had watched him closely enough by then to know how he operated. When he was interested in something, he leaned in. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered details from previous conversations and brought them back. He did all of that for Cole's internship, Cole's courses, Cole's opinions about things. With me, there was a courtesy level of attention that never went deeper. At 17, that used to sting. By the end of that fall, it had become data. I collected it and kept going. I told my parents 2 weeks before graduation. I had been offered an apprenticeship through a union electrical program 3 cities over, 4 years starting in September, a wage that increased each year, a path to a journeyman card, then a master license. I had done the research over 6 months without mentioning it to anyone, including my mother. Her reaction was cautious but open. She asked how far the city was, what the housing situation looked like, whether I was sure. I told her yes, I was sure, and that I had the paperwork if she wanted to read it. She went through the whole packet that night and told me she was proud. My father's reaction was harder to read. He went quiet first, which he didn't usually do. Then he asked if I had considered the state school that had accepted me, whether I understood the difference in long-term earnings between a trade and an engineering career, whether I had talked to anyone before making this decision. I told him I had done the research. He said research was different from experience. I agreed, which seemed to frustrate him more. Cole was finishing his MBA. That fact was in the room without anyone saying it. You could always start the apprenticeship and still apply for spring semester, my dad said. I'm not going to do that, I said. I'm just saying the option stays open. I know you are. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual, checking if there was something under the surface. There was, but not in any form he would have found useful. I had already made the decision. I was telling him as a courtesy, not asking for a consultation. I graduated on a Thursday, drove to my new city the following Monday, started orientation the week after that. Dennis told his brother Ray about it sometime that fall. I didn't overhear it. Cole mentioned it to me the next Christmas, as information, the way you pass along news you think someone already knows. I asked Cole what Ray had said. Cole shrugged. He said Ray had asked whether I had thought it through. I told Cole I had thought it through. He said he figured. We didn't talk about it again. The first year of the program was the hardest thing I had done up to that point. Up at 5 every weekday, on site by 6:30, pulling wire and running conduit under journeymen who had been doing this work for 15 or 20 years and had limited patience for questions they considered obvious. The classroom component ran 2 evenings a week, 4 hours each session. On weekends, I studied for the phase exams that determined whether I moved forward or repeated the year. I was good at it, not because it came naturally, it didn't, not at first, but because I put everything I had into getting good. By the end of the first year, I was faster on conduit bends than most of the second years I knew. By year 2, I had been moved to the commercial division, which paid better and involved more complicated work, panel layouts, load calculations, working off full sets of drawings. My father called every 3 or 4 weeks during this period. The calls were short by mutual agreement, though neither of us ever said that out loud. He would ask how the program was going. I would say good. He would mention something about Cole's latest role or a project he was working on or a city Cole had traveled to for a client. I would say that sounded like an interesting opportunity. He would tell me to call my mother more often. I did call my mother more. We talked for longer. She asked about the work, the city, whether I was eating. She came to visit once in the second year with a casserole packed in a cooler bag and spent the weekend on my couch watching old movies while I worked through practice exams at the kitchen table. She never once mentioned my father's opinion of what I was doing. By the end of year 3, I had the path on a legal pad taped to the inside of my closet door. Finish the program, get the journeyman card, work 2 years under a licensed contractor, sit for the master exam. I looked at it every morning before I left the apartment. Nobody from home had a clear picture of what I was doing. Dennis knew I was in the electrical program the way he knew I lived 3 cities over. It was filed under present and accounted for, not something he checked the details on. My mother knew more because she asked and because I told her. Cole knew I was in a trade and was politely neutral about it. That suited me fine. I wasn't building it for any of them to see. I got my journeyman card at 23 and passed the master electrician exam 11 months later, which was faster than the program average by about 8 months. The day I passed, I called my mother. She cried a little and apologized for it. I told her not to apologize. I called my father that same afternoon. He said he was glad the program had worked out. He asked if I was planning to stay with the company or go out on my own. I said I wasn't sure yet. He said stability was underrated. I told him I'd keep that in mind. I had been running weekend side jobs for 2 years by then, mostly residential, friends of coworkers, small referral work, panel upgrades, lighting retrofits, kitchen rewires. Word spread through the usual channels. By the time I had my license, I was clearing an extra $1,800 a month from weekends on top of my regular pay, and I had more work than I could take on alone. I met Jess on a commercial job site that spring. She was a project coordinator for a general contracting firm that had brought in the company I worked for to handle the electrical package on a warehouse conversion. She had a clipboard and a question about the rough-in inspection schedule, and she asked it in a flat, specific way that made clear she already understood the logistics and was checking whether I did. I asked her to dinner 3 days later. She said yes and then spent the first 10 minutes of the date making sure I wasn't the kind of person who said one thing and did another. I told her that was a strange way to open a dinner. She said it saved time. She was right. We talked for 3 hours and ordered a second round of food halfway through. By the following spring, she had moved into my apartment. I had started drawing up paperwork for an LLC. She was the one who pointed out that I was spending too little time on the name for something that would be on every invoice I sent for the next 20 years. She was right about that too. Dennis met Jess for the first time that Christmas. He was polite, a little formal in the way he got around people he didn't know yet. He asked what she did. She told him construction project coordination. He said that must be interesting. They talked for about 10 minutes. On the drive home, Jess said my father had a particular way of being pleasant without being present. I didn't explain it. I just said yes and left the window down for the rest of the drive. I registered the LLC at 26, Walker Electric. The name took 4 days and one argument with Jess about whether it sounded generic. She said it sounded honest. I agreed and filed the paperwork. The first year was referral work from contacts I had built over 4 years of side jobs. I took everything that came in. Panel swaps, service upgrades, small commercial retrofits. I brought on a subcontractor named Phil who had his journeyman card and was between steady gigs. We split labor on the bigger jobs. By the end of that year, the LLC had done $210,000 in revenue, and I had paid myself $62,000 of it after expenses. My father found out about the business through my mother, who mentioned it at Christmas. He asked what kind of work I was doing. I said commercial electrical. He asked how the market looked. I said busy. He asked if I had thought about the risk given that construction was cyclical. I told him I had a line of credit and 12 months of operating reserves set aside. He nodded the way he nodded when he didn't know what to say next. At that same Christmas, Cole talked about a deal his firm had closed. 7 figures, new territory, team expansion. Dad asked 3 follow-up questions, refilled his wine, and leaned back in his chair. He asked me one follow-up question, which was whether I had looked into liability insurance. I had 2 liability policies and a commercial umbrella by then. I said yes and passed the breadbasket. The second year of Walker Electric, I landed my first real commercial contract. A restaurant group opening a new downtown location. Full electrical package, $54,000. I hired a second journeyman and bought a second van. Jess built a project tracking system in a spreadsheet. Job name, contract value, phase, invoiced, collected. That I still run an updated version of today. I did not tell my father about the restaurant contract. There was nothing strategic in that. It just didn't come up, and I didn't go out of my way to bring it up. The business was mine to build. His awareness of it was not a metric I tracked. By 29, Walker Electric had 4 people on payroll, and a part-time office manager named Sandra, who had spent 15 years doing books for small contractors, and had firm opinions about how things should be filed and when invoices should go out, and why certain clients should be dropped regardless of the revenue. Our revenue that year was $618,000, mostly commercial, restaurants, medical offices, a light industrial client who sent us repeat work. I had 2 long-term relationships with general contractors who put Walker Electric in their bids automatically. The margin wasn't glamorous, but the operation was clean. No callbacks, no lien disputes, no failed inspections. I still went to family dinners 4 or 5 times a year my mother cooked. My father talked about the news and Cole's current project and whatever he was reading. Cole and I had a working relationship at a certain surface level. Polite, occasionally funny together, genuinely glad when the other had a good year. We just had nothing particular to say about our actual lives. Dennis never asked about Walker Electric in any specific way during this period. He would occasionally ask how's business in the same register he used for how was the drive up, a gap filler, not an inquiry. I would say busy, and that would be the end of it. Jess found this strange after a while. She had watched me build a real company from a licensed side hustle, and she understood that my father had no real picture of what that looked like. You could just tell him, she said one evening, not pushing, just noting. He'll find out eventually, I said. She let it go. She had a good read on which things were worth pushing on, and which ones she should leave alone. Cole called me in March that year, which was unusual enough that I noticed the name on my screen before I answered. He said his firm might be going through some restructuring. I said I was sorry to hear it. He said it was probably fine. The transition would be managed. He had options. His voice said otherwise. He was running the sentence the way you run a sentence you have already said out loud a few times, to see if it holds. It didn't quite hold. I told him to let me know if anything changed and meant it. He said he would. Cole's firm announced the layoffs in May. He was 32, 8 years at the company. A title, a salary he had built a lifestyle around, a mortgage on a condo downtown that was priced at what he made when things were good. He called my mother first. She called me an hour later and said he was having a hard time and I should check in. I texted him that afternoon. He called back that evening and we talked for 40 minutes, which was longer than any conversation we'd had in years. He was not falling apart. He was recalibrating, which for Cole looked like running calculations out loud. The firm had kept some of his team and cut others. He had been offered a severance package and was deciding whether to negotiate it or take it and move quickly to the next thing. He had leads at 2 other firms. He was optimistic in a way that sounded rehearsed, like he was running the optimism to see if it held. I told him what I knew about managing variable income months, which wasn't directly applicable to his situation, but was at least real. He thanked me, and we got off the phone. My father called 3 days later. The call started normally. Weather, my mother's knee, a book he was reading. Then he circled in. Cole's situation is harder than he's letting on, he said. I said I gathered that. His fixed costs are significant. The mortgage, the car, the membership at his club. It adds up fast when the income stops. I said that made sense. He's not going to ask you himself. He's proud. But some breathing room while he lands something new would make a real difference. How much are you thinking? I asked. $3,000-4,000 a month. Just until he's placed. Probably 90 days. I told him I wasn't in a position to carry someone else's fixed expenses month to month. He said Cole was family. I said I understood that, and I still wasn't able to do it. The call ended politely, but it ended cooler than it had started. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a minute. There was something I recognized in the conversation. The familiar architecture of a request that had been dressed as a concern. He was not worried about Cole the person. He was managing the gap between the Cole he had raised and the Cole he was currently watching. I understood the instinct, but I was not the solution to it. I pulled up the estimate I had been working on and finished the numbers. The city contract came in at $341,000. It was a multi-building electrical upgrade for a municipal recreation complex. 3 buildings phased over 14 months, with a city inspector on every rough-in stage. I had bid it clean with 4% margin built in for scope creep. The job came out at 3.8 over, which was about as close to the model as a job that size ever gets. Sandra submitted the final invoice in October. We received the check in November. It was the largest single payment Walker Electric had collected. In December, the local business journal ran a short item in the contracts section. Walker Electric awarded $341,000 city recreation complex electrical contract. 4 sentences. My name, the project scope, the amount. The kind of item I'd seen dozens of times in that section about other contractors, each one invisible unless you happen to know the name. Dennis's neighbor Howard subscribed to the print edition and read it over his Saturday coffee. Howard mentioned it to Dennis at a block association meeting on a Tuesday. Dennis called me that Friday. I saw something in the business paper, he said. Okay, I said. That was a significant contract. It was a good job. How long has the company been doing work at that scale? Couple of years, on and off. He was quiet a moment. I waited. I didn't realize the business had grown to that point, he said. We're not large, Medium, small, solid book of work. How many people do you have? 6, counting Sandra. You said Sandra is your office manager. Yes? Another pause. Longer this time. Well, he said, that's impressive. I told him thank you. He asked if I was coming for Christmas. I said yes. We got off the phone. I told Jess about the call that evening. She asked what he had said exactly. I read her back the conversation, the contract, the business journal, the questions about headcount. How did it feel? She asked. I thought about it. Like being seen by someone who was always looking, I said, but wasn't sure what they were looking at until it got large enough to show up in print. She was quiet for a moment. Is that enough? She asked. I don't know yet, I said. Christmas that year was fine. Dennis asked about the business twice at dinner. Both questions were specific. I answered them. He listened. Cole's job search ran 5 months longer than he had said it would. He picked up project-based consulting work. Intermittent, not a staff role, about 60% of his previous income. He was covering the rest with the severance he had negotiated up by 30%, a fact my father mentioned to me with some pride the next time Cole's situation came up. Dennis called on a Sunday in February. Different tone than usual. Deliberate, like he had thought through the call before picking up the phone. I've been thinking about Cole's situation, he said, and I think there might be a way you could help him that would also be good for your business. I waited. He's managed projects for 8 years. He knows how to run a team, hold a timeline, keep a client in the loop. Those are transferable skills. If you brought him on as a project manager at Walker Electric, it would give him a stable base while he figures out his next move, and it would give you someone with real management experience. I told him I appreciated him thinking about it. Cole wouldn't ask you himself, he said. You know how he is. If Cole wants to be considered for a role at Walker Electric, I said, he can send a resume to the company email. Sandra handles applications and she'll get it to me. Pause. He's your brother, Marcus. I know he is. The email is on the website. We talked for another few minutes about nothing and ended the call. Cole sent the resume 4 days later. I told Sandra to let me know when it came in. She forwarded it to me on a Wednesday morning with a subject line that said, FYI, C. Walker resume submitted. She had worked for me long enough to understand that some applications had context. I told Jess that night that the resume had come in. She didn't say anything at first. Then she asked if I was going to review it the same way I would any other candidate. I said yes. She nodded. Because if you're not, she said, you should make a decision about that now and own it, rather than pretend you're being objective. That was the kind of thing she said that made me think for a while before I responded. I'm going to review it honestly, I said. If he's qualified, I'll consider him. If he's not, I'll send the rejection like I would anyone else. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. I set an alarm for Wednesday morning and went to bed. Cole's resume was 9 pages. I read it at my desk that Wednesday morning with a cup of coffee. 8 years at the consulting firm. Client accounts in retail, logistics, financial services. Teams of 3 to 7 people, deliverables framed in slide decks, quarterly reports, client satisfaction benchmarks. I went through it twice. Cole was smart. The document made that clear. He knew how to structure an argument, manage a client relationship, move work through a team. Those were real skills. I did not doubt a word of it. What the resume didn't have was a single line that touched construction. No knowledge of NEC code, permit processes, or inspection sequencing. No understanding of how a commercial electrical job moved from a set of drawings to a completed punch list. He had never ordered materials against a takeoff, dealt with a lead time that pushed an inspection date, or managed a subcontractor who was behind on their work. He had never been on a job site at 6:30 in the morning when the GC was behind on a rough framing and the inspection was Friday. The project manager role at Walker Electric required all of that and more. A sharp person could learn it, but not in the first 90 days, and Walker Electric did not have a 90-day runway to bring someone up to baseline on fundamentals. We were a 6-person operation with tight schedules, and clients who hired us because we didn't drop things. I could not absorb a learning curve that size and deliver the same work. I forwarded the resume to the journeyman I had been planning to promote to project lead and asked for his read. He wrote back 15 minutes later, "Is this a real candidate or are you testing something?" I told Sandra to send Cole the standard rejection notice. She sent it the same afternoon. I sat with the decision for a few minutes after I had made it, which is what I always did on calls that had some weight to them, checking whether I had been fair, whether I had let the family history influence the outcome rather than the resume. The resume had not been close. That was the honest answer. If a stranger had sent me those 9 pages, Sandra would have sent the rejection without escalating it to me at all. Cole was not a stranger, so Sandra had escalated it. I had read it myself and reached the same conclusion. I did not feel guilty. I felt clear, which is a different thing. Sandra's rejection was 3 sentences. Thanked the applicant for their interest. Noted that Walker Electric was moving forward with candidates whose experience more closely matched the role requirements. compliments. Wish them well in their search, our standard language for every application that didn't move forward. I didn't think about it again until Thursday morning, when my phone lit up with Dennis calling at 9:47. He didn't ease in. I just got off the phone with Cole, he said. He received a rejection from your company, sent by your assistant. By Sandra, yes. You sent your brother a form rejection letter. His experience wasn't a match for the role. He has 8 years of project management behind him. In consulting, our project manager position requires someone who understands how a construction job runs. Cole has never pulled a permit, read a set of electrical drawings, or managed a material schedule. That's not a small gap to close in a working operation. You could have trained him. I have a business to run. I'm not building a training program around one candidate. He is your brother. His voice had gone tight. You couldn't have made a phone call, had a real conversation, made any kind of effort. I reviewed his resume seriously. He didn't meet the requirements. I'm not going to hire someone into a position they're not equipped for because we share a last name. That is a cold thing to say. It's a clear thing to say. There's a difference. A pause, then quieter. I don't understand where this comes from. You've been like this for years. I don't know what I did to earn this kind of, you'd like to know what you did, I said. He stopped. Yes, he said, after a moment. Okay, I said. I'm going to tell you something I've been sitting on for a long time and I need you to just listen. He said nothing. There was a particular quality to that silence. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but of someone who understood that whatever came next was going to require them to sit still and hear something they couldn't immediately push back on. I told him about the kitchen. I told him the date first. Saturday in July, the cookout. I had gone inside to get ice. He had been on the phone with Ray at the kitchen counter with his back to the door. Then I told him what he said, as close to word for word as I could get it after 14 years of carrying it, going nowhere. Smart enough to get by, not driven enough to do anything with it. He's got his grandfather's work ethic, and I mean that as the insult it sounds like. And then Cole got the drive, Marcus got the coast. I read it out like a statement, no heat in my voice. I had turned it over enough times that I could deliver it plainly. Dennis was quiet for a long time. Marcus, he said. His voice had changed. I was venting. Ray always gets complaints out of me. I was frustrated with how things were going. I was comparing you to your brother in a way that wasn't fair, and I know you didn't mean for me to hear it, I said. I didn't mean any of it. You have to understand, I'm not calling this a fight, I said. You asked what you did. That's the answer. That's the moment I stopped. Stopped what? Needing you to think well of me. After that, I just built what I was going to build. He tried to walk it back. He said he had always believed in me, that the frustration wasn't a real measurement of anything, that parents said things they didn't mean and I had to understand context, that Ray pulled those conversations out of him. I let him say all of it. I believe you, I said when he was done. It still happened. I still heard it, and it changed the way I went about things. I'm sorry, he said. He meant it. I could hear it. I know, I said. We stayed on the phone a few more minutes. I said I had a walkthrough to get to and we said goodbye. I sat at my desk for a while after we hung up. There was something I had not expected, the absence of relief. I had spent 14 years carrying the exact wording of what he said to Ray, and I had expected that finally saying it out loud to him would release some pressure. It didn't. The pressure had already been released, slowly, over years of building something that had nothing to do with his opinion. What the conversation gave me was confirmation. He knew now. He had heard it from me directly. That was accurate, and it was done. I picked up my keys and drove to the walkthrough. I told Jess that evening. We were in the kitchen making dinner, and I stood with my back against the counter, the same way Dennis had stood in his kitchen 17 years ago, and told her the whole thing. The call Thursday morning. What Dennis said when he found out about Cole's rejection. What I said back. What I finally told him. She listened all the way through without filling the space. How do you feel? She asked when I was done. I thought about it for a moment. Okay, I said, maybe lighter, but not the way I expected it would feel. She nodded. I thought it would feel like more, I said. I thought saying it out loud to him after all this time would land differently, because you'd already processed it, she said. That was close to right. The confrontation I had imagined at 17, the one where I finally told him what I knew, and he understood the damage, and something shifted between us. That version had required him to grant me something, and somewhere along the way I had stopped needing him to grant it. His apology was sincere. I had no doubt about that. He was genuinely sorry in the specific way people are sorry when they understand, for the first time, that something they did without intent caused damage that lasted. He had not known until that phone call that I had carried those words into every year that followed. But I had needed that apology at 17. I had needed it at 20. At 25, a version of it arriving on time might still have changed the shape of things. At 31, standing in my own kitchen, in a house I had bought with money from work my father had once written off as going nowhere, The apology arrived like a letter from a country I no longer lived in. I acknowledged it. I accepted it. I didn't need it to do anything. You want to eat? Jess said. Yeah, I said. Let's eat. We had dinner and talked about something else. A client of hers who was being difficult about a change order. A movie we had been meaning to watch. Normal evening. I thought about my father once more before I fell asleep. About the version of him I had built in my head at 17. The judge, the one whose ruling determined whether I mattered. He was a 63-year-old man who had said something thoughtless on the phone and didn't know his kid was in the doorway. That was the full story. It had shaped a lot without ever being more than that. I turned off the light. In the months after that call, Dennis tried harder. He called more regularly and the calls had more substance. Not how's business as a gap filler, but actual questions. What kinds of jobs we were bidding, how the city contract renewal had gone, whether I was planning to hire another journeyman this year. He made the drive out to see us in the spring, the first time he had come to us rather than waiting for us to come home in years. He and Jess got along in the specific way two direct people get along when neither one is trying to perform anything. He met Maya for the first time on that visit. She was 14 months old, had Jess's eyes and a certainty about what she wanted at any given moment that required no interpretation. Dennis held her on the back porch for almost an hour. He was careful with her, attentive in a way I hadn't seen from him before, asking Jess questions, following Maya's lead, making no demands on her attention. She's wonderful, he said to me quietly, while Jess took her inside for a nap. She is, I said. We sat on the porch for a while after that without much to say. The kind of quiet that is not uncomfortable but is not warm either. Somewhere between the two. Cole found a new position that fall, a consulting firm in a different city. Lower title than before, but stable work. He called me the week he started to let me know. I told him I was glad. He asked if Walker Electric was still growing. I said yes, steadily. He asked if I was happy with how things were going. I told him I was. Dennis and I settled into something that works. Calls every couple of weeks. Visits a few times a year. He asks about the company and Maya and whether I need anything, which is a different kind of question than the ones he used to ask, or not ask. I don't have a grudge. I'm not withholding anything. I'm just not pretending we got here without the detour. Cole and I talk every month or so now. His new job fits him better. Smaller firm, less pressure to perform at a particular altitude. He seems steadier. He asked me once if I was angry at him, specifically for any of it. I told him no. He had not done anything to me. He had just been the standard Dennis used, which was not Cole's fault. He seemed relieved by that. I understood why. The three of us, me, Cole, Dennis, exist now in something that functions. That is not the same as being close, but it is real and it belongs to all of us. Sunday mornings at our house start at 6:15. Maya is the alarm. She comes into our room, climbs up onto the bed by herself now that she's 2.5, and announces that it is morning in the tone of someone who has already decided the day is good. I get up and make coffee, and we sit in the kitchen while Jess sleeps for another hour. Maya has her milk and I have my coffee, and we look out the back window at whatever the yard is doing. Walker Electric is bidding 3 commercial jobs right now, 2 medical office build-outs and a school lighting retrofit. Sandra has the numbers together and I'll review them Monday. 8 people on payroll now. A second office manager starting in March. Revenue last year was $1.1 million. I don't lead with that number when people ask how the business is doing. I say we're growing steadily. My father knows most of this. He asks and I tell him. It's not a performance for him and it's not withheld from him. It is what it is. The moment I come back to sometimes is not the confrontation call. It's not the business journal item or the day I filed the LLC paperwork or the morning I passed the master exam. It's a Tuesday about 2 years ago when I was at my desk reviewing a job estimate and realized I had not thought about my father's opinion of what I was doing in months. Not pushed it down, not worked around it, just genuinely not thought about it. That is the version of freedom I ended up with. Not the kind that arrives when someone finally says they were wrong. The kind that arrives when you need them to say it so much less that by the time they do, it is just another conversation. Maya finishes her milk and holds the cup out to me and announces she wants to go outside. I put her coat on. I open the back door. She walks out into the yard without waiting. She owns this morning entirely without asking anyone's permission. So do I. My father will call sometime this week. He'll ask about the bids, maybe about Maya. I'll tell him where things stand. It won't be the relationship I wanted at 17. That version had him curious about me, not correcting for something. I made peace with the difference a while back. What I have is a business I built from a journeyman card and a spreadsheet and a van. A house that's mine. A kid who walks into her backyard like it belongs to her because it does. That is not nothing. Maya looks back at me from the yard and holds out her hand. I go outside.